It's Friday at 1 o'clock, June 18, 2021. Because I'm live, I'm going to basically guarantee the dog will bark any moment now. So he's literally sitting here right next to me. He's been quiet for about 7 hours. So he is due to bark for everybody that's on the live stream that'll come on and go, oh, interesting or whatever. Yeah, he's going to bark. Anyway, you guys are from Nullafi. And how many times did people call you Nullafi? Like, is that?
Oh, a lot. It's actually big conversation starter, to tell you the truth. It's like,
right.
You know,
well, I mean, Nullafi would be probably the first thing that I think I've heard that name come up pretty repeatedly, right? And you guys give a quick sort of background on where you started out and where you came at in the space around data security, because one of you's a lawyer, one of you's not a lawyer, and you guys are in the data security space. Like, how does that work?
Totally. And I can hop on that as the recovering lawyer, as I joke. So when in doubt, I'm going to talk because that's how my brain's geared. Sorry, guys. But yeah, no, I mean, and it's not a pitch for the company at all, but the background is essentially just I was doing legal stuff. Steve was doing military type stuff. And we realized that like every one of the clients, and I was doing emerging company practice out in the Bay, and like every one of the clients, whether it was like plastics or health tech, fintech, insure tech, real estate tech, just everything, eventually the conversation pivoted to data privacy, data security, data risk, risk mitigation. How do I control who employees are seeing what, and like hacking, and it just kept going. And I was talking about this with Steve, and he was like, on the military side, they're worried about the exact same thing. And there's almost no field that I can think of where almost every company in every vertical in the private sector, as well as every facet of the public sector, is worried about the exact same thing, right? And so essentially when we were looking at like kind of what we should be doing or not doing with our lives and what we want to be when we grow up, we were like, let's start looking at what exists in the data security space. And I know obviously we'll probably talk about this on live stream, but like data security is kind of a big field. So we didn't be like, we want to do data security. Like, sorry, I'm always referring. It was what within data security was giving people the biggest heartburn, and so that's what we kind of started focusing on.
But if in this space, right? I mean, that's why I threw the title in here. Like, why is data security so damn hard? Because I think that this is the last line for most organizations that I've talked to or run into, is they can have usually pretty good, or at least relatively stable approaches to, but data security seems to eat everybody's lunch all the time and twice on Sunday. But I don't get why it's honestly as difficult as it is. And I mean, you guys know more about that than I do.
Yeah.
I would say that there's an interesting answer to the problem and the question, which it really comes down to answering the question of what is data, right? And the problem is, depending upon the industry you're in, data can be a near infinite variation on a number of things. And the problem is, because people use it so differently and there are so many different permutations, figuring out how to solve for securing it while making it still usable and allowing it to be usable in these infinite permutations is such a difficult needle to thread that a lot of people just kick the proverbial can down the road and said, we'll figure it out later. Right now we have business to do, so we're just going to focus on the business and we'll figure out how to secure what allows our business to run some other time.
Yeah. And I would come in and also just be like, look, it's a non-static data point. It's kind of like saying like, hey, what makes like living healthy so hard?
But that's like, living healthy is one thing because it requires you to have commitment and dedication and understand that this is going to take, like I said, there's the fucking dog barking on cue almost. But yeah. I mean, that's living healthy requires folks to have, I guess I'd say it seems to me like a more of a long-term commitment, because people people look at folks that are like gym rats and that are on steroids, like literally people that are on steroids, and they go, wow, those folks, they take steroids, they're buff. Like, no, that's not it. Like you can jam steroids into your heart and it doesn't make a lick of difference if you don't work out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's true. So I guess with data security, I think it's two facets. One is it's like extremely hard, as Steve said sometimes, but also I think people get really lost in all the facets of how it could be so complicated, and all the acronyms, all the different, methods, the homomorphic encryptions, the hyper advanced tokenization, et cetera. It's all great. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's extremely powerful technology. But I think, and you talk about this a lot, Chase, really what it boils down to is strategy. And strategy is got to boil down to, like, what is your priority? And it's not always that complicated, right? I mean, the fact is, like, you're collecting data from multiple sources. You have uses for that data, right? You need to use that data in X, Y, and Z way. Is there a way to do that doesn't expose it more than it needs to be exposed, right? Gets it to the right people at the right time, in the right way, and then stores it in a way that doesn't open the doors to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants to see your data. And I mean, I know that's a drastic simplification. Again, sorry, reverse. It's a simplification, but it's not. And I think that's the problem.
I don't think it's overly simplified. I mean, right? It's like well, there's two sides of the coin. There's structured data and unstructured data. And I mean, to my knowledge, I have yet to see any solution on the market, period, that does unstructured data like really well. I've seen some stuff kind of bouncing around at it, and I've seen lots of research projects and data and their thing, but I have yet to see. And I think unstructured data, honestly, is super difficult to solve. Structured data, though, like, shouldn't be that hard. I don't think. Yeah,
it shouldn't be. And yet, as you said, it's like this last frontier, and that's why we actually have been doing what we're doing. And the response is actually exactly what you said. It's weird, which is people are like, when you see something working, it's crazy because so many things just don't work, or they have this really crazy intricate solution where you need to rip and replace the entire architecture, infrastructure you've been building, adopt whole new platforms, all to do one function, like communicate with the user securely. And it's like, you're not going to replace an entire architecture to do that one function. And that's really the difference between the data and the function of the data. The usability component, I think, is what people really get lost in. And people are on such kind of a binge for anything that can help that is used, and I've heard a lot of your podcasts and your streams. Hey, click like if you support it. There you go, free toss out there. Pay me later. But I think the answer is, like, there's a lot of crappy solutions out there, but the people are so desperate for anything that can help. And I think also, I'd say this year, starting kind of last year, but then really progressively over the last year, 2 years, not just with the regulations, but also in anyone tuning in. I mean, you guys probably know this because you're tuning in. Data security has been taken out of the techie, geek, nerd, cybersecurity, cool, military, whatever kind of sector, and it's really just thrown into mainstream. Because
isn't it?
It's a huge problem.
Isn't that a huge problem? Like, we got people that are getting involved in this that don't know what they're talking about. They're trying to, and that's why it makes me want to just like strangle a penguin when I hear people talking about privacy and data security and all those other things. And it's like we're conjiggering things together that are not necessarily the same. And privacy and data security, it's like, well, if I want to be private, the first thing I got to shut the door. If I can't shut the door, I'll never be private.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as you said, it's this weird thing where there's convergences that shouldn't be converged, and there's separations that shouldn't be separate, right? As you said, like privacy and security inherently related. Not, they're cousins. They're not brother sister. They're cousins.
Yeah, they're like third cousins, second cousins, maybe people that people you see at Thanksgiving and kind of hang out with a little bit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You see them once a year, like, they're okay.
Hey, how's it going?
I should hang out with that dude more. And then, nah.
And then you never do. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you get busy. But it's actually a funny kind of metaphor, because the fact is, like, they should actually converge a lot more, right? As you said, like, the first element of privacy has got to be security, and then there's elements of security that really rely on privacy. And by privacy, I just mean like treating stuff that shouldn't be exposed in a way that doesn't get exposed. And that's what I think a lot of people. It's bad that so many kind of untrained people are in the market, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of a blessing in some instances, because people are asking questions, more people are asking more questions. And some people are really pushing the boundaries of also, like, why is this so hard? Like you said, Doc, which is like, hey, I'm collecting data on my customers. I know I'm supposed to do something with that in a way that doesn't like I don't share it. I think maybe that's what it is. Like, I can't download and share it. And you're like, yeah, you can't do that. There's other stuff too, but you shouldn't do that. And then, getting people to ask those questions is always good. And it's driving a lot of reform, because also, as much as I hate regulatory for the sake of regulatory, coming from the legal side, regulations are always responsive.
Right, says the lawyer.
Says the covering lawyer. But they're responsive, right? I mean, like no lawmaker is going to go stick their neck out and get people pissed at them for putting forth a policy that no one cares about yet, right? They're only going to respond to their electorates. So I mean, the fact is, with GDPR, CCPA, Canada Privacy Act, PCI, HIPAA, I mean, all of these things, it's all been the trend is it responds to people being concerned about what the hell is going on with my data. That's
none of those have actually, I mean, fixed any of the problems, and that's what continues to bother me. Is I mean, in the U.S., I think we're doing it even worse, right? Where we have 50 different states, and now we have 50 different states coming with 50 different data requirements for different whatever. You've written by people that are not, necessarily deeply entrenched in the technology space. So, like, what do I do? Go look at my data and go, hey, data, you can't leave Texas, like, because I want you to stay in Texas, like. And I don't know if everybody remembers this, but from The Dark Knight Rises, right? Catwoman wants to erase herself from the internet, and Bruce Wayne couldn't get it right because, it wouldn't work necessarily for him. Like, how are we supposed to do this? GDPR and these other compliancy things, I think they're good for driving conversation, but I don't see how they are actually technically going to make anything much different than it already is. And the punishment, big deal. Like, so Marriott got breached. They cut a check for, like, I published the research a few years ago. They paid more for paper for their hotels than they did for the data breach violation. Big deal. It's a rounding error. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And I, like you said, I think the real question is, what is the conversation going to lead to? And admittedly, like I'm saying, I'm not like, ooh, this is so great, but I do think it's important to push people in a broader sector to start worrying about it. The real problem, though, is the incentive structure. And that's what you're talking about, Chase. And it's an incentive structure on a few levels, right? There's one is at the company level. Two is, where are these exposures happening? And like, why? And why are people incentivized to not have it happen? And the real kind of dark, dirty secret that you're talking about right now, Chase, is like, they're not incentivized to not have it happen. Like, Marriott, and if I were the CEO of Marriott, first of all, I wouldn't be on this call. I'd be chilling on an island somewhere. But if I happen to be on this call as a favor to a friend, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I would make that decision all day, every day from a business level. Like, look, I might have to pay however many tens of millions sometime down the road if something goes wrong. But in the meantime, I can make a lot of money very quickly without worrying about it.
And I would also add that the whole data security solution landscape has not been structured to make it easy to manage, easy to implement, easy to maintain, right? So now you have the risk reward of, the CEO of Marriott saying, look, I'm not going to lose that much if something goes wrong. But you also say, and it's going to cost an obscene amount of money to undo all their technology systems they already have in place to be able to implement effective data security. And then they're going to have to hire God knows how many people to maintain it. And then it's going to have a negative impact on their business operations. So then all combined, it comes down to, why the hell would they do this?
Also, I mean, there's a reason that the average lifespan of a CISO, not lifespan, but like corporate tenure of a CISO.
We're killing them. If they're bad at their job, we're just murdering them on the way out.
I mean, we're literally murdering them. There's a horse head in their bed. Yeah. Well, like, I mean, the fact is, like, literally corporate, whatever shelf life of a CISO is 18 months. It is one of the fastest churn and burn positions out there. And the reason is, I mean, this is what you're saying, Steve. I mean, people get, and Doc, people get pissed at you. It's a thankless, horrible job. When something goes wrong, you are the first neck cut.
Chase, from my understanding is your background in intelligence, right? When you do your job right, nobody notices or gives a shit. When you do your job wrong, you are the one who's on the chopping block because you failed.
But I mean, that's what, like, everybody's all over zero trust and whatever else. And if you go back to Kindervog's like very earliest things that he put out about ZT, he talked about securing the data and knowing the radioactivity levels and then putting micro perimeters around it, whatever. Like, that's what I've run into that people forget all the time. I see ZTNA and ZT this and all these other ZT things or whatever else. And then when you get to the data, you go, well, what are you doing for data? And they go, oh, well, DLP, and it's like, dude, that ain't it, man. Like, you're going about it the wrong way. Because, and this is from personal experience. Like, at a company I was at, which I won't name, we spent $800,000 on a DLP solution, and got 3/4 of the way through it, and it was such a piece of crap, we punted and we went and just basically said, we're not doing this anymore because everybody hated it. So like, I think DLP has screwed up the data security market and the adoption because of the fact that it's been so bad to put in place for so long. And it doesn't have to be that way, because at the end of all the ZT stuff, the Alamo is data security.
No, I think you're totally, it's like 100% right in that, and I'll refocus a lot of our kind of joking around, but I think you're right in that the data level itself should not be conflated with a lot of the other things we're talking about, right? As you said, like the network access, the device management, right? The identity provisioning, et cetera. That is all important. It's all good, but it needs to be kind of, sectioned off and coordinated and segmented from the data layer itself. And when you really examine who's working on the data layer itself, as in who can see my data, inside and outside, zero trust, the whole deal, right? Who can see it? As you said, it starts getting muffled, right? It's like, well, I control access to these applications via my blank, 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 SDP, ADP, whatever. And the answer is like, okay, but then once they're in the application, who can see your data and what data can they see? And it's starting to be ostrich in the sand, right? Like, and we just actually talked with the CISO of this massive company, and he said the same thing. He was like, look, I know it, you know it. It's the secret of the security space is like everyone knows it, but we're looking the other way because we just don't know what to do about it. Because like you said, it's hard. Now, whether or not it's actually hard or there's just a dearth of kind of like usable solutions, like you were talking about, Steve, remains to be seen, right? But I mean, I personally don't think it's that hard. And that's why I was talking about the simplicity of it, is really just like, well, why don't we just control on a usage basis and an identity basis who can see it and when? Yeah. Simple as that. What do you need to see and why and when do you need to see it to do your job? Okay, cool. Well, then you can see it then for that purpose.
I mean, if it's my organization and I have that sort of data, like, I don't know, Salesforce or Epic or something like that, and I put together this real security approach, I want it where if someone has a gun to my user's head and they're like, look, username and password, get to that system, I want to see the data. And if you don't do it, I'm going to blow your brains over the wall. I want to be like, that user can get to the data they need for that purpose. But other than that, it's off limits. Like you just, and that, I mean, like that's a solvable sort of problem that we're not seeing enough adoption of. And I don't think people take it seriously enough to be like, let's just go with a totally asinine scenario of, if I, what was that movie, Swordfish? If I put a gun to your head, right, how do I keep you from seeing what you're not supposed to see?
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And that's, look, I mean, at the heart of it, that's the ZT kind of theory, right? Is like, look, like you set up these barriers between people. It's constant, real, not just authentication in the technical sense, but as an identity, checking and trust verification. It's just trust. And like you said, I mean, trust has nothing to do with seeing data you're not supposed to. I can trust you with my life. That doesn't mean I'm giving you my social, because why the hell would I need to do that, right? It's I'm calling the cops when my house gets broken into, but I'm not giving them my social security number. It has nothing to do with their job. And so I think you're exactly right, and people lose track of that. And also, I'll say there is a hyper trust issue in like the opposite with SaaS applications right now. Is people are like, oh, well, I use whatever, HubSpot, or like, oh, Zendesk, they've got it covered. Big company, I'm sure, yeah, they're on lockdown. The answer is, guys, yeah, no, not at all, right? And you know this, Doc. I mean, yeah, there's the average knowledge worker uses between 36 and 75 different third-party applications, not including the janky internal application that some random dev 5 years ago in your company built and everyone uses for some reason, right? And the number of applications that actually offer even just basic team segmentation of data, just like on a basic level, something like between 1 and 3%. So to your point about like, look, someone holds a gun to the employee's head. You don't even need to hold a gun. That's like someone like with again, I don't want to get into the pipeline, I know, whatever, but exposing credentials is a big deal, right? And segmenting data between people such that if that happens, it's not the end of the world and people don't go without power and die because of extreme heat or cold. It's a real thing, right?
Well, there's the ransomware thing continues to show up. And I guess, so that ransomware seems to be the deal that's really focused on locking down files within systems, not necessarily structured data like repositories. I think we've seen a little bit of that, but we haven't seen a lot of it. I personally think that it's going to start showing up more and more now that the adversaries have figured out how much money they can continually make with this, and the fact that it's like, well, I got a lot of they got a lot of files, but oh wait, if I go for like their data lake, all of a sudden, my ransom goes, beep, up to the right. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Steve, I mean, from your defense kind of background, I mean, I would assume you agree. I'm going to shut up.
Oh, absolutely. At the end of the day, I think one of the critical failure points that everybody neglects to recognize is the adversary is smart and they adapt. And at the end of the day, they're going to go after targets that they know they can hit and they know they can achieve against. And the data, the repositories themselves, because once you get through the door, you have access to everything most of the time, are just such a huge risk reward opportunity for them. The CISOs of the world have to be right all the time, every day. The enemy has to be right once. And the minute that they're in, they're in. And 43% of businesses that have a major data loss event go out of business immediately, and only 6% survive 2 years. So at the end of the day, you have, there are the companies that can say, I can survive it, but there are a lot of companies that you will never hear from again, because all it takes is this one event and they did nothing wrong, but the enemy doesn't care.
Yeah, and actually, I'll kind of level up on that, Chase. I really like the movie metaphors, so I'll run with that one too. Let's say, I mean, the fact is, I'm gonna expose my nerdy side. Harry Potter, right? There was like this great.
Look like Harry Potter. I mean, if you had a little scar, like
I got it removed. I didn't want to be conspicuous.
Yeah.
But there's a line in it that I was like, it's so good, right there. I don't know, it's in some later book, whatever, and like they're dealing with the final question that everyone always keeps asking, like when they're reading the books, which is like, well, why don't you just zap his ass back, and kill him? And so the Prime Minister of Britain, whatever's talking to the Prime Minister of Magic, whatever his name is, and he was like, don't you guys have magic, right? And the Prime Minister turns around and he's like, yeah, but the other side has it too, and you're like, yeah, that's, I mean, like, again, as Steve, you're saying, I mean, I know it's kind of a jokey comment, but the fact is, yeah, we've got a lot of defenses, right? It's not like the other side isn't aware of them, isn't aware of their exposures, how to manipulate them. Like, they have access to a lot of the same technology on both sides, and we have access to their technology. And it is a constant struggle, and everyone knows this, but like between two sides that have 98% of the same information.
Yeah, right? But so the problem that I have with a lot of these folks that kind of roll over on their back and go, the bad guy has only got to be right once. In reality, if you look at it, the bad guy also has to maintain access.
Yeah.
So if you're able to interrupt their access at any part of the whole kill chain, you've messed it up for them. And I do those workshops with people all the time, and there's always that person that's like, all they got to do is be right once, and we're owned. And it's like, yeah, you might be, and that's probably a fair statement. But if you can keep them from doing things they shouldn't do, seeing things they shouldn't see, and you can remove their access, then you win. And they'll find somewhere else to go because you're the harder target. I mean, that's why people that don't have ADT put ADT signs in front of their house.
I was literally about to say that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
And yeah, to be clear, the idea of once they're in, is only relevant if you don't have technology to make sure that you can limit their access, cut off their access, you can trace them, and there's going to be a risk reward. And again, they're going to go after the targets that are the most vulnerable. That's just the reality of it. And the highest risk reward, right?
Type stuff. No, I mean, I agree. And Chase, kind of synthesizing what you're saying, what we're saying. No, I completely agree. I think what I mean is that there will always be this evolution and the push-pull, the response, of an attack, a defense. The defense shores up the exposure. The attackers find a new exposure entry point. They dig through the wall. They don't go over it. Great. Okay, cool. Let's extend the wall underground. We were only looking up towards the sky. Like, cool, right? And none of that indicates that it's not worthwhile. And none of it indicates that it's not working. Like you said, like, cool, guys, they didn't climb over the wall. Like, let's keep that in mind. Like, we built it 40 feet high. They didn't get over it. They did get under it, one guy, until we found that hole. Now we're 40 feet underground too. Cool. Let's keep our eyes peeled. Like you said, Chase, if you can stop the access, the lateral movement, access to key resources, the gun to the head, employees, it's all about incremental improvement in the posture, but also keeping in mind that some of that incremental improvement has to be leaps forward in certain areas that have just gone unlooked, like unprotected, et cetera. And as you said, Doc, I think the last Alamo is the data itself. People have just been like, cool, I'll do everything up front. But once they're in, I don't know what to do there.
And that's, Chase, from the Intel world, one of the things that, it's finally kind of pivoting over, which is, in my mind, very similar to zero trust, is need to know, right? You could be an intelligence officer, but there are going to be programs that you are not read onto. And it's because there's absolutely no reason why, based upon your job, you should have access to that information. And to your example of somebody put a gun to your head and it's like, well, I can't get it to you. Sorry. If I was read on,
my brain's out, dude. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
That's game over for me, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's, kind of, and now I think zero trust is a very similar idea, which is like, look, if you don't have a need to see something, you shouldn't see it, period.
Yeah, but there's an inverse to that too, right? Of if we do it the right way and we're making sure that people only have, I guess, the right controls in front of them for the purposes of what they're doing, then we can actually lift off some of the bullshit people deal with because it's not really applicable. Like we have everybody running around in full kit, plus writing in an MRAP and everything else, and it's like, well, no, we got people that can just sit back in the DFAC and make dinner. Like we don't have to have everybody all the time ready for battle. It's just dumb and it sucks for people.
Completely agree.
Rob's like, what the hell does all that mean? I don't know.
I half these conversations I've had, everyone's like military background, hardcore, cool, all buff and stuff. I'm like this 5'10" random dude that doesn't know half the acronyms people are dropping. Whatever. Yeah, I hate the rap.
Lots of acronyms and military stuff to sound legit in cyber. So
it'd work. I mean, hey, you do sound legit. The MRAP and the hang on forward fob.
Yeah, fob. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go. See,
which is not the little dingle thing that I use to get into the office.
Correct. Yeah, a cop is also not a policeman. If you're talking about a cop, it's a combat outpost. Yeah, those type of things.
Okay, good to know. I hadn't run across that one, so good. No, but I mean, I think you, from my perspective, from the legal side, really, and when I always joke about legal, I mean, legitimately, I would say, much like that, it actually gets a bad name. And the only reason it's relevant for this is it's really a lot of people are focusing on risk mitigation. That's the name of the game right now, as you said. And there's been a huge push, I think, justifiably, to have people not running around in full kits. Sorry, yeah. I'm so satisfied with myself. I lost my train of thought. But in full kits, because also that doesn't make you more secure. And that's the previous thing was, as you said, let's arm everyone to the teeth with as much, procedures and protocols and everything. And that's good in some levels. But as you said, some people should do the cooking and some people should do the cleaning and some people should run around in kits and whatnot. But it's not necessarily just about how many people are running around in kits. It's about the other stuff supporting them. And are the policies in place? Are the protocols in place? Is the equipment correct? That's a great analogy. Are they running around with the correct equipment for what they need to do?
Yeah.
And that's so important. And it used to be hey, let's give everyone a literal cannon and they can roll it around with themselves. And that would
lug that big bitch up the hill. Yeah.
Exactly. It's they climb hills for a living, right? It's
right.
Well, that's their problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. But what do you think, Chase? What makes it so damn hard, which I think is the title of the stream.
To me, it still shows up that most folks try and solve way too big, way too quick, right? They don't look at, like we're saying, I think structured data, taking care of that is a solvable problem that you could do right now, that you could vector in on and say, for this just back to Kindervog's original model, right? If you said, this is my super critical stuff, and I know I can apply a controller, I'll do that first. And then you can do other things, because that is the Alamo. And honestly, I should stop referencing the Alamo because it didn't work out well for the guys. I'm from Texas, so I kind of got to. But and then from there on, they should be doing other things and going bigger. But most of the time, it's because they go too big with too much, and they're not really solve one thing. And the example I had is I did some stuff with a bank, and they said, we want to start with 5,000 users. And I was like, nope. And then they said, okay, well, we want to start with 500. Nope. We got it down to 10. And I was like, let's get this right for 10 users to get to 10 things, to get to the resources they need and only the data they should see. Yeah. And they were like, really? It's yes, if we can do it for 10, then we can do it for 25. And we get it right 25, we do it for 50. And then you just go up the scale rather than 5,000 users. Technology says we can do it, so let's just do it, because technology's never let anyone down, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, and yeah, I think it's funny. It is a different mindset. It's a mindset very common in startup space, not necessarily in established company space, to be laser focused on a very finely tuned set of deliverables, execute it well, and then scale, right? And almost every successful startup will know that. Like, look, I don't want a customer base of 10 million from day one. Like you can always tell the disciplined startups from the not, because the disciplined startups are like, I want 10 customers and I want to nail it beautifully, find their buyer persona, their pain point, their price point, what are they not seeing in the market? I want to hit that. And then I want to get 25. And then I want to get 25 to 200. Cool. And I can make that jump, but I need a lot of groundwork ahead of time. And as you said, I think that's lacking, but it's a discipline in data security too. Like, do it right on a smaller scale. Make sure it's working, not obstructing. As you said, the DLP, like, don't buy the $10 million solution assuming it's going to solve all your problems tomorrow. It's not going to, right? It's an enabling tool like gunpowder. But I mean, also, I think there is, in my humble estimate here, and again, feel free, anyone, and if you're tuning in, I don't even know if people are tuning in. I don't know.
They are. It just takes a while for it to catch up. So, usually
cool.
It's at the end.
Yeah, shoot some comments if you want. But I mean, I don't know if people disagree, but I think, the first, like, the funny thing is people are also, again, with the acronyms and the encryption and all these different things that people really kind of just put as like this catch-all, like, oh, well, we encrypt, whatever. And that's great, but it's got to be backed up by strategy. I mean, and some of this stuff it's not new. Like, let's be totally frank here. It's great there are more advanced encryption methodologies. The first cipher wheel was made in 1470. 1470. I mean, like, that's just, and it does pretty much exactly what encryption did, is like number X equals whatever, and there's a little key and you do it. And I think the first, like, a decoder ring in a cereal box was in the 1930s, where, like, 5-year-olds get the idea. They're like, I'm going to write you a message and no one else can understand it unless you have the little ring. And it's like, that's encryption, right? So, like, it is damn hard. It is really complicated, but it's also because people get in this very myopic view of what is or isn't the right thing to do, versus thinking, as you were talking, Doc, always about strategy. What's the point here?
Well, but don't you think it's also fair to say that with the introduction of all of these compliance requirements, that skews the strategy? Because all of a sudden people go, oh, crap, I've got to do that because of a compliance need. And if I don't, I'm in violation, which means I can't do business. So, like, it's the self-licking ice cream cone of misery, right? Where, the legal side of this thing is skewing the technology strategy side of it, I think.
Well, I mean, lawyers are infallible. I'll just start with that. And we make no
lawyers are infallible. Insurance never screws anybody, and I don't know, something else. Politicians tell the truth.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you're right. I will. There's two caveats here, and I'm going to expose my nerd side here, because I think the interesting thing is, I think you're right in that regulatory, because, as I was mentioning before, all the regulations are always backward facing, right? I mean, they're responding to problems that have come up to the point where people get pissed enough to lobby and write letters and all that other stuff, and then Apple gets involved, and then once Apple's involved, it's done. And the fact is that it's a blunt tool. Regulation is a very blunt tool to a very it's a very blunt hammer to, like, a very nuanced problem, right? Not everyone needs to do X, Y, and Z. And then that's why they often don't include implementation guidelines or structure. There's like, hey, you need to treat it in a reasonable manner. And everyone's like, well, that doesn't help me. And, like, to be frank, that's part of the point, though. It sucks. Yeah. But what they're saying is, look, a 50-person company dealing with dental implants is very different than a 450-person company dealing with, I don't know, travel logistics tracking through their SaaS application. It's different, right? You both need to be respectful of personal data. Like, okay, cool. Now, on a functional level, that's useless, because everyone's like, what the hell does that mean? I don't know. Am I even exempt, not exempt, whatever. But to your point, I think the problem is that it starts occasionally pivoting the conversation to just, how can I get over this hurdle on regulatory, and not how can I be secure, and how can I, like, respect the data that I'm collecting? Can I be a good custodian of that for customers, and how do I do it well in line with my corporate strategy? Just to, how do I check the boxes? It's a box checker. That being said, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I fully expect that you're going to send me a box of dead penguins to my doorstep at some point.
Tuesdays on a find a penguin farm or something where I can have to strangle it at my leisure. There's probably
otherwise, it's very stressful to find the right time to strangle a penguin.
I am really curious to see if that ends up becoming your side hustle, Chase. I'm just saying.
You know, so I mean, I will say, and this has been backed up in other sectors as well. Like, for example, the kind of a lot of the regulations surrounding the securities market, et cetera, is that by making people at least against their will do some of the basic stuff, you know, it does get a broader range of people to be doing something, right?
Okay, well, but you're a lawyer and you know lawyery stuff. So let me ask this question because it comes up all the time, right? If people have guidelines and requirements and a history that says these are best practices and they don't do it, what is the line for negligence in this space? Because it's negligent to not do it. And then, I mean, for some reason, we continue to have people that go, oops, I screwed up. And then they just kind of get away with it. And it's like, no, we've like, how do you not know that that's to have admin on a public facing web server for a decade? Like that's negligent.
Totally. Okay, great. Yeah, let's do this. I'm very excited about this.
We're talking law stuff, so why not talk some law stuff?
Let's talk some law stuff. No, I think you're right. The problem is a fewfold. One, let's get something clear, which is negligence usually follows a reasonable standard, right? So I'm not going to go like super down the road, but the problem with cyber is no one bleeping knows what's reasonable because the lawmakers aren't technicians. Oh, I'm not saying no one. I'm saying you know what's reasonable, right? And like half the
lawmakers, the people writing
lawmakers and the people enforcing the law.
Enforcing the law is like, I use SHA-512 AES 256. It's like, oh, I use a different encryption standard and something got into my data and figured it out. And you're asking a lawyer to make a very sophisticated argument as to why one is reasonable, one's not. In light of, and as you were saying, in light of their corporate structure, their mission, oh, they use AWS versus Azure versus, I mean, it's a million variables. Lawyers can't figure it out. I'm sorry, we're not geared that way. So the problem is negligence and all that. As you said, the end result is a Marriott of the world, where they tie it up in battles and they're like, look, we did everything we could, given that, hey, we're a hotel. We need to know your social. We need to verify your identity. How do you want that guy at the hotel to make sure it's you? Do you want strangers checking into your room and strangling you while you sleep? And everyone's like, oh my God, I don't want that. And I'm like, well, then I need to show your social to the hospital, to the worker, right? To the guy picking up the phone. And the lawyers are like, yeah, that's true. I really don't want people strangling me in my sleep. You know, and that's where the argument is. That's what I would say if I were their lawyer. But what I mean is so that line is, one, is fuzzy, always evolving, and that's what everyone always argues. But then two is on the regulatory side, you know, as you said, coming full circle to the Marriott problem. So the end results, unless you can levy a fine, and that's a separate question, is like, can things like GDPR and PCI and HIPAA actually penalize you enough to make it worth your while? And the answer is like, kind of no, right? Yeah, exactly. And I know everyone was jazzed about GDPR being like, yeah, finally, it's got some teeth.
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah. No. But that's the intent, at least, where like you get out of the loop. You get like out of that loop of like, do something, ask for forgiveness, not permission. The answer is like, nope, you can't ask for forgiveness because you had to be compliant up front to even operate in Europe. And if you're not, what, 3%? What is it? 1%, 3% of your GDPR or something? Your global GDPR?
Up to 4.
Not GDPR. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. Global revenue, whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Even like, you know, the fine levied against Google, you know, by the EU, $57 million.
Ooh.
While they were writing the check to pay it, they need more than the fee itself. So, and one of the things which I think also comes down to the point about the reasonableness standard, is that the UX, the user experience in terms of how easy it is to apply effective data security, has not evolved. So in terms of it being reasonable, in terms of all the things that have to come into place for it to work effectively, it's easy for a company to say, look, there are all these moving pieces. It's so hard to maintain and so hard to manage. And lawyers aren't qualified to be able to counter that. And the reality is, it's also because most of the solutions out there, frankly, suck in terms of how much effort and how much of an ass pain it is to do it well. It's inevitable that something is going to be misconfigured, misstructured, and something's going to go wrong. And the argument is, well, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to see actual like driven change in a lot of this space until somebody a big time exec that screws the pooch goes to prison. You know, I mean, it's one of those deals where I would bet I don't know some amount of money that I don't have, that like once someone of note goes to prison for doing the wrong thing in cyber, not a fine, not a whatever, but a prison sentence, all of a sudden it's like, okay, because, you know, I mean, I keep running my head around like it's kind of the same thing of if I was manufacturing aircraft. I know aircraft need wings. I know aircraft, and I have decades of experience and best practices that tell me they have to have more thrust than weight. If I start shipping stuff to people and planes start crashing, and then they come back and go, why did you ship every plane with only one engine that wouldn't actually get it off the ground? And I go, sorry, I didn't know any better. Like,
you know, it's actually funny you mentioned the aerospace, because I'm going to give, I know you're not supposed to do this crap on YouTube, but like, look, you can look up names and stuff. Our father was actually deeply involved in the legal counsel at one of the largest aeronautic companies in the country. And with that role, he actually dealt with a lot of their safety and things like liability, et cetera. And he always, when we were growing up, he always said this, actually kind of like what you said, which is like, also, it really boils down to culture. He's like, a company can do half of what they're supposed to do and financially probably be just fine. You know, they can try to weasel out of problems. They can try to weasel, you know, with silence, hush money, you know, like, oh yeah, a plane went down. Let's pay the families as much as we can to just get them to not talk, whatever. Now, obviously that is a highly, highly, highly regulated space, right? So you can't just pay families because there's the FAA involved and stuff, but you get the point, which is this extends all the way down the supply food chain, everything, right? And that's why, back to the regulatory, but not really, is at the end of the day, as regulated as something is, it's incumbent on the players in the space to not be assholes.
Douche nozzles. I don't know, something.
That's why I paused for a second. I was thinking, like, what should I calibrate to? Yeah, sure, douche nozzles. But the real thing is, I mean, and it's a very serious thing, and I mean, like, I really do say that not lightly, because the line where regulation or liability stops and personal responsibility and private market forces take over is extremely fine. And so there's tons of instances where there's leadership at, you know, the highest level that really will not prioritize safety. And I mean safety, personal safety, I mean data safety, I mean data privacy. And they say, as a person, I'm in charge of this thing and I don't care. I don't care. I don't give to the ASPCA. I don't care about that either, right? These are things I don't care about in life or as a corporate like entity. And then there are leaders that say, look, and you've encountered this, I'm sure, Doc, like some, you know, in your Forrester days, I'm sure you worked with some companies that legitimately are trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. They're like, look, we just care. I don't know if the numbers line up. I don't know if, you know, I'm going to make more money by being private and secure or whatnot, but I sure as hell don't want 10 million of my customers' lives and medical records and the fact that they're dealing with a cancer, you know, that's incurable. I don't want that public, because that's horrible. And that's us as a company, right? And they hire the right people because they say, hey, would you care about this? And then someone's like, no, I don't care. Cool, you're not getting the job.
Yeah,
right?
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that, because I mean, if you don't have the intestinal fortitude to do the right thing, then what does it matter when money's involved? Because money's, what's the saying, the root of all evil, right?
Yep.
You know,
I completely agree, and I think that's what a lot of this boils down to too. But I will say, some of that also comes, I like the intestinal fortitude thing, but I mean, this is, again, coming full circle, not that this is like a regulatory discussion at all, but I will say removing hurdles, regulatory, private sector, payments, board, whatever, removing hurdles for leadership to care and like to implement things when they do care, you know, and like your current company, I know they're great about this. I mean, the fact is they can care and still it can be so hard for them to implement that eventually they stop trying. Yeah. Or they can really care and people enable them to it.
Well, people do that. I mean, like you say, people do that all the time, and everything just, I mean, it's the same, back to the fitness thing, right? It's the same thing where people get a membership in January 1st, and by January 30th, they've stopped going because they don't see results. And it's like, you realize that it took you 40 years to get to where you are. It's not going to take you 30 days to fix all of that, you know, those ding dongs and Coca-Cola 6 times a day.
But I think the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that there's like internal forces, but there's also external. There's vendor forces. I mean, again, and you saw this at Forrester 24/7, is how easy does the cybersecurity industry make it for people to care or like want to do it? And your DLP solution, like you guys were doing the right thing. You weren't necessarily regulatorily required to use DLP.
No.
Right. But eventually you're like, screw this. And you guys are like the best of breed. You know what I mean? That's all I'm saying. Well, yeah, don't let it go to your head. But like, you know, I would say you guys are top of the class in terms of like caring and doing data security, doing data privacy, and even you couldn't cross that hurdle. So Steve, to your point, some of this is also incumbent on the industry to be like, hey guys, here's a tool that for the people who want to do this, you can use it. You can afford it. You can explain it. You can show it. You can deploy it. You can, we are enabling the people who want to do this to do it and do it the right way. And I think that's kind of sometimes gets lost in the shuffle a little bit because it's an ecosystem, right? I mean, it's got to be.
Steve, closing thoughts.
At the end of the day, we are actually on a very positive note. I think we're really kind of at the cusp of some really innovative adaptations to the cybersecurity market in the context that more and more people are realizing the absolute necessity of cybersecurity, and B, in terms of the vendors, they're realizing that people are expecting and demanding that things are easy to use, easy to manage, and easy to maintain, right? So I think increasingly we are getting to a potential threshold where all of a sudden data security and data visibility isn't inherently something that is unapproachable for the average consumer of data. And I think there's a real possibility that in 10 or 20 years, we're going to look back and say that, the 2020s were the period where all of a sudden data security became something that wasn't as hard as it always had been.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's missing in the space around it is ease of use, and like no more having to write regexes and things like that, because that is, I mean, that when I was running a knock, a SOC sort of operation, I mean, that was the criteria for getting an interview, is if you couldn't write a regex to find something in a data structure, we didn't even bother. And now when I look at that, I'm like, my God, that was a bad way to do business, and it really sucks to make people write regexes. I mean, all right, well, great talking with you guys. Thanks for coming on. Obviously, this will be, something that we'll put out there. Rob and Steven, and I'm sure that, the text in me butchers last name, so I think it's Yalskowitz, right? Is that the right way to say it?
That was actually pretty good. Considering,
yeah,
no, you're good, man.
Yeah, I didn't even redneck it to death, so that's a good thing. Other than that, yeah. Thanks a lot. Look forward to chatting with you guys more, and this is a topic area that I know that we're going to re-engage on.
No, that sounds great. And thanks for having us so much. As always, a real pleasure to talk to you and be here. And we're happy to re-engage anytime, man.
Super.
Sounds good. Thanks, Doc.
Have a good one.